Hello from Free Market. I am your host, Wachom. I am delighted that today we are joined by exceptional guest from Sweden, Dr. Johan Geseke. Dr. Geseke, thank you so much for your time and welcome to Free Market.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Professor Geseke to our audience because in this case his credentials are very important. Dr. Geseke is trained as an infectious disease clinician in Sweden. During the 90s, he received Master of Science in Epidemiology from London School of Tropical Medicine in 1992 and worked as senior lecturer there for a few years. After this, he became state epidemiologist for Sweden from 1995 to 2005. After that, until 2014, he was the first chief scientist of the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. Professor Geseke has written textbook on modern infectious disease epidemiology and now teaches at Karolinska Institute of Medical University in Stockholm. Is everything right, Mr. Geseke?
Yes, that was right. Thank you.
In your book, on your cover of your book, I noticed that in the city of Ragusa, in 1377, there was the first regulation to avoid plague. They are asking travelers to undergo 1 month mandatory quarantine for purposes of disinfection on some islet. As such regulation seems reasonable, considering the risk of getting plague for medieval people. What risk poses brand new COVID-19 for modern nations and for the humanity? Simply put, how dangerous is coronavirus for the human race in general? What is your opinion about it?
Most people who get the infection will not be sick at all, will not have any symptoms. So it's mainly a symptomless disease that's spreading between people and they don't know they have it. So the total, there will be people who get ill and there will be people who get very ill and there will be people who die, but the big part of the infection is symptomless.
But in this case, what do you think, why is your opinion so different? And every country, almost every country in Europe fears COVID-19 as a very dangerous infection, new infection. What is the reason of such a discrepancy between your opinion and other epidemiologists?
We know that the population of Stockholm, about 25% now are immune to the disease. They've had it and they don't know they have it. It's spreading very quickly, much quicker than we thought. And because it's infecting people who are not sick, you don't even notice. What we see is a small portion of the outbreak. Mm-hmm. And it's a new disease and people die from it. So of course people are afraid.
And how do you know that in Sweden such a number of population is already had it? I heard from Stanford professor Ray Bhattacharya that they conducted some study, antibody tests for one county of 2 million people, and they found that disease is from 2 to 4% already cured, and these people doesn't know about it. How do you know that in Stockholm, for example, you have same situation? Did you conduct such type of tests?
In principle, yes. But the problem with the serology tests is that they're not very sensitive. They miss a lot of cases. But there is some calculation behind it. I won't go into it. It's very technical. But we know that a large part of the population already had the disease.
Okay. Now, you said in your interview with Lockdown TV that from the beginning, Sweden, government of Sweden, you decided to follow evidence-based approach. Can you describe what does it mean, evidence-based, and what is alternative to this approach?
Well, there are two things we know that are evidence-based. One is good for to wash your hands. That's
and everybody knows.
We've known that for 150 years, so that's scientifically proven. The other is that social distancing is good, that you don't get too close to other people. That's also proven. But when you come to things like border closure, when you close the borders for neighbor countries, or when you close the schools, there's almost no science behind this. So most of the measures that have been taken by European countries have very little scientific foundation.
And how can you explain this?
Why they take? Because the politicians want to show strength and decisiveness and be active. So the politicians want to make action.
Okay, if now, for example, how can you compare the Swedish situation to, for example, Italy's case that caused such a havoc and horror on Western countries? What is the difference, for example, between Italy and Sweden?
They were caught early in the epidemic. They didn't even know about it, so they weren't really prepared. But I think we shouldn't compare countries now. We should wait 1 year from now and see what's happening. And my guess is that most countries will have the same type of epidemic all over Europe.
Dr. Geseke, can you give an advice? For example, if you were chief epidemiologist for Georgia, like you were in Sweden, in such a situation, the population of Georgia is about 4 million people. Based on official data, there are about 400 infected, 100 already recovered, and out of 300 active cases, 6 are qualified as critical. We just have 5 patients died yet. We prepared about 1,000 intensive care units reserved for COVID infection. And our government is saying that we have one of the best situation in Europe, and continues to follow these strict lockdown measures. Nobody is getting out of their homes, flats, all businesses are closed, and this is considered as a sane policy. How can you evaluate and what advice can you give to Georgia's government or population? Does not matter.
The problem is the lockdown. How long can you keep the lockdown? Because what you're doing now is you're pushing the problem in front of you. It will return when you open up the lockdown. And you can't keep a lockdown forever, that people should stay at home. How long should they stay at home? 3 months, 6 months, 18 months to wait for the vaccine? So at some point you'll have to skip the lockdown, and then you'll have the problem. Then you'll have many more cases.
This is, I think, the main question, and what was very interesting for me in your interview, that you said that you are most afraid of dictatorial trend in Eastern Europe, and then as an example referred to Orban's Hungary, and mentioned that these trends will bear devastating consequences. Georgia is not mature democracy yet. Country is governed by one party. We have problems with judiciary and so on. The only factor distinguishes us from other post-Soviet countries or China is that we have greater freedom of speech and more open economy. At the same time, government and other institutions that were not reliable and trustworthy before this epidemic suddenly became adopted role of savior of all population, and we have slided back to Soviet Union in just 1 month. What do you think? How can we develop exit strategy from this situation? What advice can you give? How can we somehow push back these restrictions? If we suddenly take all restrictions,
you can't lift them all at the same time. Then you'll have a massive wave of new cases. And I've been wondering all over Europe, when governments decide on a lockdown, why haven't they thought about the exit strategy? Before you do such thing, you should see, okay, when do we stop it? How do we stop it? But it's too late. It's too late for almost every country because you have the lockdown and you haven't thought about how to get out of it. What I think most countries will do or will have to do is you take all the restrictions you have, you take one of them and you remove that restriction, and then you wait 2-3 weeks to see what's happening, more cases. And if not, then you're okay, and then we take another restriction. If it shows that you get more cases when you take away the restriction, then you have to take it back again. So it will be a long process, one restriction at a time, wait 2-3 weeks, see what happens, and then go on. So it will take months before the exit is finished.
I think that is not realistic for Georgia. For example, I can ask you such a question. Take 3 different countries. For example, poor Bangladesh, some low middle income country like Georgia, and affluent Sweden. That you are now proposing is that in our situation we could have some savings, people or government can have reserves that can help people to somehow manage this with this crisis. But in such a country such as Georgia, we cannot afford to wait months to take these restrictions gradually. If, for example,
you could start now. You could start now with one of them. You don't have to wait, but you could start now.
You think that only strategy to finish this lockdown craziness, I call it in this way, is to start today. And what do you think? If government does not communicate with anyone and does not discuss these issues, and they refer to WHO or other Western countries, they are doing these things and we are just copying them. What in such a dire situation people can do?
Nothing. I don't know what people should be doing. I mean, you could civil disobedience, you don't follow the restrictions. I don't know what they are in Georgia, but I mean, if in other countries, if the police see you in the street in a group of people, the police tell you to go home. But if the people stay outside, and if there are 100,000 people in Tbilisi going out, what will the police do then?
We're today trying to do that. I don't know how many people will show up, but this will be one of the attempts in this direction. And what do you think? Maybe all this policy is because Chinese initial response was so huge or so impressive to all other world media, especially mainstream media, that everyone thought that this is most evidence-based approach to copying such an epidemic.
But you can't. China is a special country. What they did in China, I don't think any other country in the world can do the same. So you should never compare yourself to China, because China is a special. And in any country that isn't a very strong dictator country, you can't do the same thing as China. So you shouldn't follow China.
Thank you. And the one last question about our colleagues. I'm not considering myself as a doctor, but as trained doctor. I'm very curious how all these epidemiologists that are in Georgia, for example, no one has different opinion. Everyone agrees with government policy, and no one thinks like you, for example. And maybe they even studied by your book, epidemiology. How it happens?
I can't answer that, but I know that in many countries in Europe, the people are accepting the lockdown. They're not negative to the lockdown, but I don't think they have really, like I said, no country has an exit strategy. When will this stop? You can't keep people locked up forever, not in a democratic state, you can't. So I think, I don't know why other epidemiologists don't think the same way, but they haven't really thought through the situation, I think. It's easy to shut. It's easy to shut the borders. It's easy to shut the schools. It's easy to tell people to stay inside. But what will happen in the long run? I don't think they thought of that.
You said that anyways, it does not matter what measures we will take. After 1 year, we will have same results as, for example, countries who did strict lockdowns and, for example, Sweden. Yeah. In Georgia, for example, 4 million population. As you said, from seasonal flu, every year dies about 800, around 1,000 people. So we can, for example, calculate that in this year, whatever we do, we will have same fatality rate from COVID-19. Does it matter what we do now? In 1 year, we will have same fatality rate from COVID-19. Is it right?
I think it will be probably a bit more than influenza. But I used to say that if influenza was a new disease, if it came now, you never had influenza before in your life, the world haven't seen influenza, and it's a new one, we would have exactly the same reaction as we have now. But we're used to influenza. We know influenza comes every year. Okay, we know that 1,000 people will die or 800 people will die. That's accepted. But if influenza was a new disease, the reaction would be exactly that we're saying now for COVID.
And one last question: how did you convince the Swedish population, for example?
I didn't.
Who did and how they managed in this global psychosis that everyone is of different opinion, and just one country in Europe remained on his own logic or senses?
Well, can I tell you that the difference isn't that great, really? If you go out in Stockholm now, the capital of Sweden, at 9 o'clock on a Saturday evening, you won't see many people outside because people are self-isolating at home. They've been told it's good for you to be at home, and the way I see it is people are not stupid. If you tell people that this is good for you, this is good for your family, this is good for the rest of the population, you should distance yourself, you should be at home, you should work at home if you can, people will do that. You don't need laws, you don't need the police. People are not stupid. But so the difference between the Swedish, in reality, it's quite similar actually. People are behaving the same way as they do in France or UK or Georgia.
But I did not heard from you the answer about Georgia's figures. Can government intervention make difference? For example, because they locked down 1 and more months ago the country, and we have really small number of infected people. But if we consider the serological tests that we are not conducting yet in Georgia, it will be 50 or 100 times more people who even does not know that they had some time in their life virus. So we have thousands of infected people on the streets. Yeah.
I think you have, yes.
But can we attribute to government's policies that such a situation, or we should seek other reasons?
Should protect the old and the vulnerable people. They should be protected from infection. That's the most important bit, because young people under 50, under 60, who are not ill, they will not get very severe disease.
Okay.
And most of them will not know. Okay. Thank you
very much. Thank you very much I hope that your opinion will help somehow to shift public opinion about this virus and government interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Wow.